The historical figure commonly referred to as Nostradamus was originally named Michel de Nostredame and was born in 1503. His precise date of birth remains uncertain. However, it is postulated that he was born in the Provence region of southern France in December of that year, presumably in the town of Saint-Rémy-de-Provence on the 14th or 21st Street. Jaume or Jacques de Nostredame, his father, was a notary for the Provence administration. Rainier, Michael's mother, was the granddaughter of the renowned physician Pierre de Saint-Rémy of the municipality of Saint-Rémy. Although the exact number is unknown, Jacques and Rainier had a minimum of 9 children. This was not an uncommon occurrence during a period characterized by inconsistent birth records and high neonatal mortality. The context of the Nostradame family was somewhat obscure, and little is known about Michael's youth. It is possible that the family had Jewish ancestry. This circumstance put them in a challenging stalemate, as during the High Middle Ages, the Jewish people endured severe persecution in France and other nations, including England, where governments issued orders requiring them to convert to Christianity or completely abandon their dominions. Although many converted, they maintained private Judaism. The Nostradame family persisted for centuries, in part due to the decentralized and feeble character of the French crown, which impeded the royal implementation of such directives in regions like Provence. Midway through the 15th century, however, the impetus to convert was apparently such that Michael's grandfather, Jacques' father, a man named Cresques, about whom he knows nothing beyond the fact that he was a moneylender in Avignon, converted to Roman Catholicism. Subsequently, on March 25, he embraced the Christian appellation Pierre and the surname Nostradame, denoting his conversion on Our Lady's Day. These appellations signified his devotion to the Our Lady, and were pronounced as a symbol of his transformation. Michael's Judaic heritage might have held some degree of importance. Michael's subsequent works were significantly influenced by the substantial influence of esoteric knowledge and mysticism that characterized Jewish literature and thought in Europe during the late medieval and early modern periods. The Jewish Kabbalah, a school of thought within Jewish mysticism that sought to explain the relationship between an eternal, immutable God and the finite world of mortals, was foremost in this regard. This was preoccupied with sacred texts, the majority of which were written outside the mainstream of Judaism and utilized rituals and language that were susceptible to a multitude of interpretations. Frequently, the language was ambiguous and possessed an apocalyptic quality. An illustration of this can be seen in the Zohar, a collection of books that provide mystic commentary on the Jewish Torah and serves as its fundamental text. Notably, the Kabbalah gained prominence primarily among the Jewish communities residing in southern France and Spain during the 12th and 13th centuries. Consequently, it is highly probable that the Nostradame family was subjected to substantial exposure to this phenomenon in the centuries that ensued. Long have scholars acknowledged that the Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism influenced the later works of Nostradamus. Little is known regarding Michael's formative years. The rumor that Michel received a portion of his initial medical training from his maternal grandfather, Pierre de Saint-Rémy, during his infancy, is unquestionably unfounded, given that Pierre de Saint-Rémy passed away when Michel was an infant. Michel evidently matriculated at the University of Avignon in 1518, at the age of 14, an institution that is regarded as one of the oldest universities in France, having been founded in 1303. Subsequently, he commenced his baccalaureate studies at that institution. Similar to the majority of academic programs in Europe during that era, the baccalaureate degree program placed significant emphasis on logical reasoning, rhetoric, and grammar, as well as the writings of Aristotle and Cicero. Michael's tenure, nevertheless, was prematurely terminated due to a significant bubonic plague outbreak in southern France, which compelled the college administration to shut down the establishment. At the time, this practice was widely accepted. In times of significant plague outbreaks, individuals with the financial resources to do so tended to migrate to rural regions in order to escape the densely populated metropolitan environments that facilitated the spread of the disease. Inadvertently, the closure of Avignon in the late 1510s influenced Michael's existence significantly. He utilized this opportunity to embark on an extensive journey throughout Western Europe, and it appears that he completed the majority of his informal medical training during this time. Regrettably, comprehensive information regarding his activities and study locations during this period is scarce. Nevertheless, much can be deduced by examining the level of medical understanding in Europe during the 1520s. This period occurred before the medical revolution, which transpired during the 17th and 18th centuries. It was during this time that the initial scientific evaluations of remedies for diseases commenced. Conversely, during the 16th century, the management of ailments predominantly depended on methods that exhibited limited medical effectiveness, most notably bloodletting, which involved withdrawing a substantial volume of blood from an ailing individual. The notion that the equilibrium of bodily humors, including bile, determined health was inherited from ancient Roman and Greek physicians like Galen. As a result, it was hypothesized that bloodletting could function as a means to readjust the humors. In other regions, the field of medicine relied heavily on traditional remedies and restricted techniques of surgery. The lack of fundamental medicines, including penicillin, and the absence of vaccines for an additional 2.5 centuries contributed to the potential fatality rate during the 16th century from a vast array of ailments that are now regarded as minor. In light of this, Michel's medicinal knowledge during the 1520s was predominantly derived from folk remedies and unwavering optimism, rather than solid scientific principles. In the late 1520s, certain aspects of Michel's existence become marginally more transparent. By the mid-1520s, it was evident that he had established himself as an apothecary in southern France. He made the decision to further his knowledge in his field by enrolling at the University of Montpellier in 1529. Established in the 1130s, the University of Montpellier housed one of the most ancient formal medical schools in Europe, although this was preceded by an 11th-century medical school founded in Salerno, Italy. However, similar to his 10-year-old sojourn in Avignon, Michel's tenure here was brief. The college administrators at Montpellier became aware of his pre-university occupation as an apothecary within a matter of weeks. This action manifestly contravened the university statutes of the time, which forbade students from possessing prior experience in a manual craft. Universities in Europe were predominantly attended by affluent offspring of the nobility and gentry. Michel was therefore exiled from Montpellier within weeks of his arrival. His expulsion order has been preserved in writing and can be located in the archives of the University of Montpellier at the present time. Although Michel, who was only in his mid-20s at the time, would have undoubtedly perceived his expulsion from Montpellier as a setback, it appears he utilized the rejection as inspiration to advance his personal studies and commercial endeavors. Thus, during the early 1530s, he began to specialize as a plague doctor, the type of practitioner who attended to individuals suffering from the horrifying bubonic plague during the early modern period. Despite being primarily linked to the catastrophic Black Death that ravaged Europe in the 1340s and 1350s, during which more than one-third of the continent's population perished, the pandemic maintained a consistent pattern of occurrence in various regions throughout the succeeding centuries. It was especially prevalent in southern France, which was situated along the principal trade routes connecting Italy and northern Europe. Frequent human movement along these routes frequently resulted in epidemics, such as the one that shut down Avignon in the late 1510s, when Michel was there. Despite its severe nature, therapeutic approaches for the plague were still constrained, despite the widespread recognition of the efficacy of social isolation and quarantine. The term quarantine originates from the Italian phrase for 40 days, which denoted the mandatory waiting period of ships at anchor in the harbor of a major port such as Venice prior to discharging their cargoes if they were originating from a region infamous for a plague outbreak. Rose pills, a remedy Michel himself invented, constituted his strategy for combating the pandemic. Rose petals, sawdust extracted from verdant cypress trees, cloves, calamus, and line aloes comprised these. Although these would have been completely ineffective on their own, Michel also instructed residents of a plague-stricken town or village to ensure that deceased plague victims' remains were promptly removed and buried, and that surfaces were kept clean, in conjunction with his rose pills. Additionally, he advised individuals to get ample fresh air, and in contrast to the overwhelming majority of his contemporaries, he did not propose bloodletting as a preventative measure against the disease. Thus, although his rose pills were ineffective, Michel's recommendations regarding sanitation were beneficial. The efficacy of these sanitation measures is demonstrated by the fact that during the early to mid-1530s, his standing as a plague doctor expanded throughout southern France, and communities afflicted with the disease frequently sought his counsel and requested his presence. This ultimately led to his attainment of financial independence. Michel, for example, traveled to Aix, the capital of Provence, in the late 1530s, when the epidemic broke out, and assisted the city authorities in containing its spread. He was subsequently granted a lifetime pension in recognition of his services. Additionally, Michel was married at this period. In the year 1531, he accepted an offer extended by Jules César Scaliger, an Italian physician residing in the southwestern French town of Agen. Michel wed a local woman, possibly Henriette d'Encoursa, upon his arrival. The couple rapidly produced 2 sons. However, the matrimonial union came to a tragic end in 1534, when Michel's wife and 2 children perished in the plague that ravaged the area. Perhaps this individual calamity prompted him to redouble his endeavors in the development of strategies to halt the plague's virulence and spread. However, his tenure at Agen was noteworthy for additional reasons. Scaliger, the individual who initially extended an invitation to him to the town, possessed an outstanding academic standing recognized across Europe. He had participated in written debates with Desiderius Erasmus, the preeminent European scholar of the initial half of the 16th century. Michel was therefore able to utilize Scaliger's extensive library while in Agen. Although the exact nature of his readings during this period and their potential influence on Michel's subsequent writings is unknown, it is indisputable that whatever he encountered in print during this time period could have influenced his thought process. Michel's existence would be significantly altered in 1538 by an occurrence that, had it not taken place, might have rendered him invisible to the world at large. In France, he was accused of heresy during that year. It was perilous to be perceived as a heretic at this time. Germany was being besieged by the Protestant Reformation, which was also beginning to spread to substantial portions of Western Europe, including France. Michel, undoubtedly apprehensive of facing severe penalties, abstained from attending his trial and essentially absconded. The majority of this transpired within the borders of France, suggesting that his transgression, which prompted the heresy accusation, was sufficiently minor to permit him to sustain his professional activities in Provence and other areas. Nonetheless, he also embarked on a journey to Italy. It was at this location that he formed professional relationships within the printing industry, of which Venice was the center in southern Europe. Michel would soon begin publishing, and his impending success could be attributed to the Italian influences that had already shaped him. During this time, he returned to France in the mid-1540s and once more fought against a plague pandemic in the city of Marseille. Following this, he ultimately established his residence in Salon de Provence, where, during the late 1540s, he initiated a second family by wedlock with Anne Ponsard, a prosperous widow. Following that, they would be the parents of 3 daughters and 3 sons. Furthermore, Michel, who had amassed substantial annuities and payments from his years as a plague doctor and his wife's personal finances, was able to establish himself as a writer as he approached what is considered middle age today but considered old age at the time. Michel embarked on his authorial career in 1550 with the publication of his inaugural book. This was a miniature booklet or pamphlet known as an almanac. The 16th-century European publishing industry was built upon these brief and inexpensive publications. At a time when the production of complete books was still prohibitively expensive, booklets of 8, 16, or 32 pages could be mass-produced rapidly and sold affordably. Almanacs were manufactured throughout Europe during that period to cover a wide range of topics, including ongoing religious disputes between Catholics and Protestants, agricultural affairs, and recipe books. Almanacs constituted a subgenre of literature that provided year-specific information on a particular subject. Michael's initial publication pertained to astrological predictions, and the authorship was galvanized by a subsequent visit to Italy, during which he reconnected with acquaintances within the publishing industry. In this instance, he displayed a display of audacity by opting to Latinize his name and self-identify as Nostradamus on the cover. This decision would have lasting consequences. Following the almanac's commercial success, he continued to publish at least one annually for the following decades. Unfortunately, copies of these have not generally survived to the present day, notwithstanding their popularity during that era. Consequently, it remains largely unfeasible to ascertain the evolutionary trajectory of Nostradamus' prophetic writings during the early 1550s, specifically how they progressed from almanacs to his more renowned prophecies. The almanac's main structure is indeed known to us. These comprised 12 quatrains or 4-line compositions, each of which contained prognostications for the forthcoming year expressed in rhymed language. These were composed in a nebulous, obscure, and nearly clandestine style of language that captivated and intrigued readers during the mid-16th century. Furthermore, their versatility allowed for an extremely broad interpretation. As a result of their instantaneous popularity, Nostradamus concluded that they constituted a viable format for his future writing. Thus, during the early 1550s, while he was producing his annual almanacs, he also conceived of a much grander undertaking: the composition of hundreds of quatrains on a vast array of alleged future events that would transpire in Europe and beyond. His increasing renown as a mystic and clairvoyant in southern France during the 1550s inspired him to pursue this path. As word spread about his almanacs, affluent French nobles, merchants, and gentry frequently sought his counsel regarding their personal matters and prospective developments. Then, in 1555, he published the initial volume of his magnum opus, initially titled The Centuries but later renamed The Prophecies, which he initially titled Les Premières Centuries, aux Propheties, and which was published in the city of Lyon in the same year. 10 centuries are covered by the 942 quatrains that comprise the Prophecies. In 1568, shortly after the demise of Nostradamus, this accumulated quantity was ultimately compiled and released in a single edition. Nevertheless, the publication history was inconsistent. For example, the initial edition published in 1555 consisted solely of 353 quatrains and a preface. These were rhymed, 4-line compositions that, similar to his almanacs, contained highly ambiguous prognostic statements regarding potential future events. For example, one of the initial quatrains predicted that the citizens of the new republic would be troubled when the whirlwind overturns the litters and cloaks obscure their faces. At this time, the whites and reds will rule erroneously. This is sufficiently ambiguous that individuals of subsequent generations and years could interpret it in a variety of ways at various times. Furthermore, in contrast to the almanacs, the prophecies were not said to contain precise references to particular years. Thus, the material in these quatrains might, in theory, pertain to an event that transpires at an unspecified future time. Ultimately, the appearance of prescience and ambiguity in Nostradamus' prophecies enabled their interpretation in an apparently boundless variety of ways. Although Nostradamus addressed a wide range of subjects, they generally revolved around political and social occurrences. The prophecies contained copious references to monarchies, empires, and kingdoms, as well as monarchs and queens. As expected of a work of prophetic rhymes, much of it was also historically grounded, with references to people and locations from the distant past or to the passage of time after Nostradamus' time of writing. An illustrative passage from the final decades of the first century of quatrains read, "At that moment, Cyprus's hopes of finding relief from the forces of the Aegean Sea will be dashed. Seniors were massacred. Additionally, the queen was more enticed by the king's orations and supplications. Notable figures from antiquity are referenced elsewhere, including Hannibal, the formidable Carthaginian general who led an elephant-drawn army across the Alps to initiate the Second Punic War against Rome in the 3rd century BC. Additional passages make frequent allusions to the deities of ancient Greece and Rome, whereas Nostradamus was preoccupied with the movements of vessels on the Great Seas and weather patterns. Warfare and natural catastrophes naturally captivated him, and the prophecies are, in essence, an infinite catalogue of dreadful occurrences and periods of unrest that are yet to transpire in the annals of human history. The geographical scope of the prophecies was notably expansive. Subtitles such as, represents part of what is currently occurring in France, England, Spain, and other parts of the world, were appended to printed editions of the book, suggesting that Nostradamus considered his work to be predictive of developments that would transcend the regional concerns of southern France. For example, the text contains place name references to regions such as Scandinavia, the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, Eastern Europe, and the Ottoman Empire, which had expanded to encompass a significant portion of the Balkans, Middle East, and North Africa by that time. A portion of this reflected the era in which Nostradamus resided. During his early 16th century years, Europeans had recently developed practical methods of circumnavigating Africa via sea and reaching the Americas by setting sail westward from Europe. The prophecies serve as a reflection of the transformative shifts taking place in European understandings of geography and the diverse array of peoples they encountered during the continuous exploration beyond Europe. Additionally, it reveals how particular a number of the references were. When he speaks of countries far from France, he frequently refers to specific cities and islands. Numerous specific cities, villages, and provinces in countries such as Italy, France, and the Low Countries are mentioned in greater detail. Owing to his preoccupation with classical elements, he frequently utilized the nomenclature that the Romans applied to various regions of Europe. In a broader sense, the extensive geographical coverage of Nostradamus's works has rendered them more enduring and relevant to a more diverse range of individuals than they would have been otherwise. Despite the enigmatic nature of Nostradamus's writings, centuries of scholarly investigation into the prophecies have unveiled that they were composed in a manner that heavily relied on particular sources. For example, Nostradamus frequently endeavored to replicate occurrences pertaining to kings, queens, warlords, kingdoms, and empires in his quatrains, wherein he described epidemics befalling empires like Rome, the overthrow of rulers, and monumental transformations impacting republics and kingdoms. To find motivation for the composition of these quatrains, he extensively researched classical history, perusing literary works such as Suetonius's Lives of the 12 Caesars, a historical biographer for the Romans, and Plutarch's comparative historical biographies of notable Greeks and Romans, which were both composed in the 2nd century AD. In other contexts, he referred to more recent prophetic works authored by religious figures, including those authored by Girolamo Savonarola, a Dominican monk renowned for establishing a transient theocracy in 1490s Florence, Italy. This is evident from the fact that the initial phases of the prophecies comprise a sequence of biblical quotations that are nearly identical in structure to how Savonarola employed them in a text he authored more than 5 decades prior. The arrangement and selection of biblical quotations are inexplicably similar. They cannot be merely coincidental. The Mirabilis Liber, also known as the Miraculous Book, was an additional significant piece of literature that he employed. It was a compilation of prophecies attributed to Christian saints and divine figures, accumulated since the 11th century and not officially published in France until 1522. It has been discovered that numerous additional passages of the prophecies make extensive use of similar texts or entirely paraphrase them. The manner in which Nostradamus utilized the texts he utilized as primary sources is still a contentious issue within the academic community. Certain scholars posit that his perusal of these works was methodical and structured, as the French physician meticulously perused volumes in his Salon de Provence study until he encountered passages that ignited his imagination. However, there are those who hold less favorable opinions regarding Nostradamus. These individuals argue that he merely tossed open books at random, such as the Mirabilis Liber, and drew inspiration for his prophecies from the contents of whichever page he happened upon. The precise mental state he was in while performing his work has also been the subject of considerable debate. Supporters of Nostradamus have been eager to interpret his writing method prior to being inspired by a transcendental approach or a prophetic vision in his study as a form of meditation, perhaps flame-gazing or another such practice. However, in the few extant writings and personal correspondences where he explicitly describes his writing method, Nostradamus states that he merely endeavored to achieve a state of mental tranquility and peace prior to composing his quatrains. His method lacked any mystic qualities, and he categorically denied being any sort of prophet. Additionally, Nostradamus and his work must be evaluated in light of the intellectual climate of the 16th century. The scientific revolution was in its inception at the time. Nicolaus Copernicus' publication of On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres during the lifetime of Nostradamus transformed European conceptions of existence by demonstrating that the planets of the solar system revolved around the Sun, as opposed to the Earth being the center of existence. During this time, the new Renaissance knowledge that had originated in Italy between the 14th and 15th centuries began to spread to France, Germany, the Low Countries, and England via the Alps. Initiated in Germany in 1517, the Protestant Reformation contested every established doctrine of the Church. Additionally, Europeans started to investigate the globe. Various Italian, Spanish, and English mariners discovered the Americas between the years 1490 and 1500. Prior to that, the Portuguese had identified the maritime route from India and China via Africa. During the early 1520s, when Nostradamus was just beginning his adulthood, a Spanish expedition under the initial leadership of Ferdinand Magellan successfully completed the inaugural circumnavigation of the globe. During this era, everything was open to interpretation, and each passing year presented the potential for fresh perspectives on the world. Such a society fostered the development of individuals like Nostradamus who were capable of producing clandestine, esoteric, or prophetic works similar to those he produced. A notable aspect of 16th-century European intellectual discourse that had a profound impact on the works of Nostradamus was the resurgence of Neoplatonism and Hermeticism. These were intellectual movements that centered on esoteric or concealed forms of knowledge and arose during the final centuries of the Roman Empire. An example of such a movement is Hermeticism, which derives its name from the late antique movement attributed to the legendary scholar Hermes Trismegistus. Its primary concerns revolved around disciplines such as alchemy, astrology, and sorcery. During the time of Nostradamus, these topics were highly contested among scholars in Europe. They served as the foundation for the scientific investigations of numerous scholars, including Giordano Bruno, an Italian scholar of the 16th century who amalgamated astrology, proto-science, Hermeticism, and Neoplatonism in his writings, Sir Walter Raleigh and John Dee, both based in Elizabethan England, and Sir Walter Raleigh and Giordano Bruno, who were all striving for the Philosopher's Stone, the alleged substance that would enable individuals to transcend these challenges. In 16th-century Europe, Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, astrology, and prophetic writings comprised the mainstream of intellectual discourse. Nostradamus wrote in this tradition to a great extent. In spite of the fact that these forms of radical intellectual investigation may appear archaic or primordial in the eyes of modern science, they were crucial to the advancement of the scientific revolution. Thus, Nostradamus wrote during a period when individuals with a background in proto-scientific inquiry and medicine, including himself, frequently incorporated astrology, prophecy, and other forms of esoteric knowledge into their works. However, instead of being remembered for the intellectual climate of their time, Nostradamus's writings are renowned for their purported prognostications regarding significant historical occurrences. An especially noteworthy prophecy attributed to Nostradamus that is thought to have materialized pertains to the Great Fire of London. A minor fire that broke out in London in early September 1666 rapidly consumed a significant portion of the city. Despite the relatively low death toll, the majority of the medieval city was devastated. As a result, numerous Nostradamus devotees began to identify a particular quatrain in his prophecies that appeared to foretell this event. This was stated as follows: "In London, the blood of the just will be at fault. Upon being struck by lightning at 23 and 6, the venerable woman will descend from her elevated position. Numerous members of the identical sect shall perish." This has been construed as a direct prophecy of the Great Fire, primarily due to the explicit mention of a massive incineration of London, but also due to the reference to 23's the 6, which may be construed as summarizing to 66. Nevertheless, lightning did not contribute to the Great Fire. Instead, it commenced in a baker's workshop, resulting in a negligible number of casualties, in contrast to Nostradamus' allusion to several of the same sect perishable, and the reference to ancient lady does not appear to allude to the political climate of England during that era. Nonetheless, in the late 17th century, the Great Fire and the apparent allusion to it served to enhance Nostradamus' reputation even further. Although his prophecies encompassed a vast multitude of geographical regions, France and French affairs were invariably the primary focus. Thus, it is not remarkable that fervent Nostradamus readers have discerned a number of significant occurrences in French history that were purportedly predicted by the Provençal plague physician. The French Revolution and the ascent of Napoleon Bonaparte were the most notable. A significant sequence of quatrains in one of his centuries prophesies a period of intense conflict and discord within the nation, succeeding the emergence of a new sovereign. In this passage, Nostradamus asserts, of a name that no French monarch ever possessed. There has never been a more devastating earthquake. The trembling of Italy, Spain, and the English is undoubtedly consistent with Napoleon. His ancestry belonged to a Corsican family of moderate social standing, one that was more Italian than French in origins and had never previously come close to dominating France. His conflicts did encompass England, Italy, and Spain, and by the mid-1800s, the Spanish peninsula had emerged as a pivotal hub during the Napoleonic Wars. Nevertheless, a skeptic might observe that periods of civil unrest frequently lead to the rise to power of wholly new ruling dynasties, whereas France's immediate neighbors, Italy, Spain, and England, have the highest probability of engaging in war with France. Adolf Hitler, another prominent political figure in modern European history, is purportedly the subject of a prophecy attributed to Nostradamus. One of Nostradamus' quatrains reads, "A young child will emerge from the depths of Western Europe into impoverished parents. Through his tongue, he will captivate a large number of individuals." The subsequent section, which spans centuries, elaborates on how this person will be involved in vile, wicked, and infamous oppressions and mentions a adulterine dame, which proponents of the theory that Nostradamus predicted the rise of the Third Reich argue is a hidden allusion to Nazism. The final phrase of the section alludes to the transformation of the planet into terrifying black in complexion, due to the deeds committed by this individual and his adherents. An extensive collection of additional quatrains are also cited as having implications for the overall trajectory of the Second World War. For example, a passage that compares the expulsion of a sizable mastiff from a city to the astonishment of an alliance formed could be interpreted as referring to England's expulsion from France and Paris in 1940, as well as the peculiar characteristics of the alliance that Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany briefly agreed to between 1939 and 1941. At the very close of the Second World War, in August 1945, the nuclear bombings of the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are believed to have been predicted elsewhere by Nostradamus. Undoubtedly, the passages are quite precarious. To provide an example, Nostradamus predicted in the same quatrain that famine within plague would transpire and that scourges the like of which have never been seen would occur within 2 cities. The latter phrase has been interpreted by some as a possible allusion to radiation illness. Regardless, the allusion to 2 cities holds an enduring literary importance that dates back to the Old Testament. Therefore, it is unsurprising that Nostradamus opted to employ this phraseology. Other completely ambiguous quatrains have been utilized to describe significant political occurrences. It was 18 years after the atomic disasters of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas, that numerous individuals recognized the significance of Nostradamus' quatrain, "From on high, evil will fall upon the great man." Additionally, the same quatrain continued, "A dead innocent will be accused of the deed." These passages are completely ambiguous, and to construe them as pertaining to the assassination of Kennedy presupposes that Kennedy hymns an undeniably renowned prophecy attributed to Nostradamus is his purported premonition of the terrorist assaults carried out by al-Qaeda against the Twin Towers of the World Trade Centers on September 11, 2001. It is difficult to deny the reason. According to the pertinent quatrain, "Two steel birds shall descend from the sky upon the metropolis. At an altitude of 45 degrees, the sky will torch. As a flame approaches the New York City of greatness. Immediately, a vast, dispersed flame emerges. Rivers will be brimming with blood within months. The undead will not remain on earth for long." Nostradamus' reference to two steel birds falling from the sky over a great city is a potent allusion to the planes that collided with the Twin Towers, while his description of scattered flame leaping upwards is an exact match for the firestorm that erupted above downtown Manhattan on that morning in 2001. Furthermore, the allusion to "within months" as rivers of bloodshed serves as a chilling portent that the United States would invade Afghanistan and Iraq in retaliation for the assaults mere weeks later and months later, respectively. Advocates of the profundity of Nostradamus' prophecies undoubtedly possess a compelling case for the remarkable prophetic nature of these quatrains. Furthermore, there are more contemporary occurrences as well. The significance of a quatrain concerning 2022, as articulated by Nostradamus, because they harbor disapproval towards his divorce, a man whom they ultimately deem contemptible. The populace shall compel the island's monarch to vacate. A man who never expected to be king will succeed him. Some have interpreted this as a reference to the negative public sentiment that accompanied Prince Charles's divorce from Princess Diana. King Charles III of the United Kingdom was recently crowned, and some have interpreted this quatrain as an indication that he may be forced to abdicate, perhaps in favor of his younger son, Prince Harry, rather than his designated heir, eldest son Prince William, who never expected to be king. Other quatrains and passages that appear to foretell the conflict in Ukraine since the spring of 2022 have also been identified. The quatrains that prophesy the Black Sea boiling due to the sun's extreme heat are especially pertinent in this regard. As a result, Nostradamus predicted that inhabitants of the Mediterranean and neighboring areas would endure severe hunger due to the altering weather patterns. Naturally, this begs the question: if Nostradamus purportedly foresaw such a multitude of these momentous historical occurrences, then what might his prophecies have revealed about forthcoming developments in the 21st or 22nd centuries? The omens are ambiguous. Elon Musk and NASA may be dismayed to discover that Nostradamus quashed the hopes of a prosperous Mars colonization by announcing, quote, "The light of Mars will go out." Additionally, he appeared to foresee a protracted global conflict commencing in 2023, albeit with a 7-month duration. However, a potentially most unsettling quatrain alludes to a collapse of the worldwide food chain and the emergence of an actualized iteration of The Walking Dead. Without a doubt one of his most distressing quatrains, Nostradamus warns, "The price of wheat will increase to the point where individuals will devour one another." Consequently, individuals with an obvious propensity for panic buying should probably refrain from engaging in such predictions of the future. Considerable attention must be devoted to the inherent ambiguity of Nostradamus's prophecies when attempting to evaluate them. Not only did Nostradamus utilize esoteric, rhyming language to obscure his meaning, but he also utilized other techniques to do so intentionally. During the period in which accusations of prophecy or support for dark magic could result in heretical charges, the Frenchman was writing. Nostradamus had encountered this difficulty in the 1530s and had no intention of repeating it. As a result, he employed a variety of languages, including French, Provençal, Italian, Latin, and Greek, when composing the prophecies in an effort to obscure his intentions at times and dispel any suspicions that he was working for the demon. Furthermore, certain particular place names and additional terminology utilized by him can be construed in an entirely peripheral manner. This is exemplified by his mention of the Swiss philosopher Rousseau in one instance. However, contrary to what some analysts have interpreted him to mean during the 18th century, Rousseau was not an uncommon name in the 16th century Provence region. More significantly, numerous analysts have maintained that the ascent of Adolf Hitler was predicted by Nostradamus's quatrain referencing Hister in Germany. Until it is determined that the term Hister merely referred to the lower reaches of the Danube in the 16th century. Therefore, apart from their extreme vagueness, modern readers' interpretation of Nostradamus' prophecies without an understanding of the 16th century context in which they were composed or the numerous literary and classical allusions they contain, has resulted in a multitude of complications. An additional aspect worthy of mention with respect to the overall organization and substance of the prophecies, as well as their ambiguity, is the absence of precise time periods. It might be expected that a compilation aiming to deliver prophecies regarding future events would require an extensive number of dates. Contrary to appearances, Nostradamus only mentions 9 specific dates during the period spanning from 1588 to 3797. Following this, some readers have attempted to imply that other elements of the text, such as the reference to the Great Fire of London, which occurred in 1666, could be utilized to determine the general time period in which an event would transpire. Nevertheless, the absence of dates undoubtedly presents a significant obstacle in the assessment of Nostradamus's oeuvre. He himself attributed this to the book's cyclical conception of time, which held that conflicts, natural calamities, and political upheavals that occurred during the reign of the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans in the Mediterranean, continued to the present day, and would continue to do so for centuries to come. However, notwithstanding his assertions regarding what he termed transmutations of time, Nostradamus was merely augmenting an additional dimension to time. Strangely, despite establishing itself as one of the most recognizable works of the last half-millennium, the prophecies were not initially well received in Lyon in 1555, when they were published in their centuries-long edition. Due to the esoteric character of Nostradamus's writings and the dire predictions they contained, a considerable number of individuals harbored suspicions regarding his affiliation with dark magic or occultism. The suspicions that were presently being raised may have sufficiently troubled Michel to incinerate a number of the more contentious texts that he had in his salon study. Nevertheless, notwithstanding the lackluster initial reception, his publishers consented to further publish centuries' worth of quatrains in the years that ensued, and as sales surged, further editions were produced in Paris. The undertaking, which Nostradamus had originally planned to span a millennium and comprise 1,000 quatrains, was never completed in its entirety. By the mid-1560s, Nostradamus' demise would have prevented the completion of the work. However, it was nearly finished, and as a result, the initial comprehensive volume comprising 942 quatrains was published in 1568. There has been conjecture regarding the authorship of a few previously unpublished quatrains that were incorporated into this comprehensive edition of 1568. Nevertheless, it is indisputable that the substantial majority of these quatrains originated with Nostradamus and serve as the foundation for his prophecies, as they have been extensively analyzed, pondered, and reviewed since their initial publication. Not limited to the almanacs and prophecies, Nostradamus produced additional written works during his later years. In the 1550s, among his other accomplishments, he authored a text concerning Egyptian hieroglyphs. The text, known as the Oros Apollo, consists of 182 verse epigrams and explores the characteristics of Egyptian hieroglyphics. These symbols and pictograms were utilized by Pharaonic Egypt from the 3rd to the 1st millennium BC as a written language. The Hieroglyphica, authored by Horopollon of Mantheus, a Greek scholar residing in Egypt during the 5th century AD, when the Eastern Roman Empire was still dominant and Alexandria, the northern capital of Egypt, was a declining but still prominent center of learning on a global scale, served as the primary source of inspiration for almost all of Nostradamus's work. Presumably, Nostradamus had utilized a Latin translation of Horapollin's work by the French scholar Jean Mercier, which had been concluded several years prior. Nostradamus did, however, intersperse brief commentary of his own throughout the text. An extraordinary aspect of these is that the world of 16th-century France was completely ignorant of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Successful translations did not occur until the 19th century, subsequent to the unearthing of the Rosetta Stone in Egypt by Napoleonic forces in the late 1790s. However, it is intriguing to note that the French seer and astrologer, whose writings were replete with obscure information, was intrigued by an ancient secret language that remained unintelligible. Neither did he produce any other works. Consistent with his extensive background as a physician, apothecary, and plague specialist, Nostradamus authored several medical-themed works during the 1550s. The primary such work was a 1555 publication on cosmetics and medications. This document, which was labeled a cookbook and contained preserved recipes, exemplifies the unusual way in which the production of medicines could intersect with other endeavors during the 16th century. Whether one was creating cosmetics or health foods, they both utilized constituents obtained from nature. Consequently, their properties were frequently strikingly similar. For example, an early recipe in Nostradamus's text called for nutmeg oil, an ingredient that had a variety of applications, including in cosmetics, cookery, and medicine. Nostradamus supplied instructions on how to whiten and clean one's teeth, as well as how to prepare an aphrodisiac, elsewhere in the text. Simultaneously, he undertook a paraphrased translation of the Protreptic, a medical treatise that had been authored by the ancient Roman physician Galen more than a millennium prior. Therefore, it is evident from the foregoing that although Nostradamus is primarily recognized for his prophecies, during the 1550s he produced a vast collection of written works and translated works on a variety of subjects. As a result of his scholarly endeavors and published works, Nostradamus's notoriety in France quickly surpassed anything he had previously achieved as a prosperous plague physician during the 1530s and 40s. Over time, Nostradamus amassed an extensive following that even reached the regal court in Paris. In 1533, Prince Francis, the heir apparent to the throne, entered into matrimony with Catherine de' Medici, a descendant of the influential Florentine political and financial lineage. Catherine, who had been a Renaissance Italian, became Queen Consort of France in 1547 upon the accession of King Francis II. In 1555, she traveled to France, bringing with her a passion for astrology and almanacs, which she transferred to Nostradamus after discovering the almanac for that year. Catherine subsequently summoned the Provençal seer and physician to Paris. She was intrigued by one of the quatrains in his almanac for that year, which alluded to a potential danger to the royal family. Although he was initially terrified for his life, the Queen greeted him cordially. After that, she corresponded with him frequently in an effort to gain insight into future occurrences. Then, in 1559, subsequent to the tragic jousting accident that claimed her husband's life, she assumed the role of regent for her sons, who were premature to assume leadership independently. At that moment, Catherine's conviction in the seer's prophetic capabilities from Provence had been firmly established. Indeed, a few years earlier, Nostradamus had predicted in one of his quatrains that the younger lion will triumph over the older one, and that it would be brought about by piercing a ruler through the eye. This prophecy gained significant relevance when Catherine's spouse perished at the hands of a joust fragment that penetrated both his eye and his brain. Thus, in the 1560s, Nostradamus was elevated to the positions of royal counselor and physician in ordinary to the young King Charles IX through Catherine's patronage. This resulted in an additional pension for Nostradamus and substantial protection against subsequent accusations of heresy or dark magic. An indication of his increasing wealth was observed in his and his wife's financial contribution to a project initiated in 1556 by Adam de Crappon, a French engineer, to construct a 25-kilometre canal that would transport water from the river Durance to Salon de Provence. The primary objective of this endeavour was to provide irrigation to the region, which was notorious for summer droughts. Due to the undertaking's tremendous success and the Nostradamus' ownership of a 13th stake, de Crappon proceeded to extend the canal in both directions, northward to the river Rhône and southward to the vicinity of the Mediterranean littoral at Istres. The Nostradame family enjoyed a relatively comfortable lifestyle in Salon de Provence during the 1550s and 1560s due to this and his numerous pensions, royalties from his expanding collection of published works, and professional endeavors as a plague doctor and physician. Despite this, he, his wife, and their 6 children continued to reside in the same modest house in the town, which is still standing today, an indication that his lifestyle was not extravagant. By the 1560s, Michael's health had deteriorated significantly. His principal complaint was gout, an osteoarthritis subtype characterized by recurrent episodes of excruciating joint inflammation. In the early 1560s, notwithstanding his patronage by the royal family, he encountered a final confrontation with church authorities when the local bishop ordered his brief imprisonment at Marignan. Nevertheless, this was not due to allegations of heresy or occultism. Instead, it was his failure to obtain the requisite authorization from the local church authorities prior to disseminating one of his almanacs. Permissions of this nature became progressively more imperative in a nation where church authorities were vigilant in examining any literary creations for indications of religious dissent, as France descended into a succession of religious conflicts in the early 1560s, which persisted for the subsequent 4 decades. By the mid-1560s, Nostradamus's condition had significantly worsened to the extent that his gout was leading to edema, a chronic disease characterized by substantial fluid retention and subsequent edema throughout the body. This could have a profoundly detrimental effect on an individual's mobility. His circumstances had deteriorated to the point where he arranged his financial and legal affairs via will during the summer of 1566. Although not extravagant, his estate, which he bequeathed to his wife and children, was considerable. Following this, he passed away in the early hours of the morning of July 2, 1566, or during the evening of July 1. The subsequent account, which claimed he had informed his private secretary, Jean de Chavigny, the night before that he would not return alive at sunrise, seems a bit too good to be true. However, it is indisputable that the subsequent publication of the first complete edition of the Prophecies, which featured this prophetic prediction, did not hinder sales for the following 2 years. The municipality of Salon's Franciscan church was where he was interred. The peculiar afterlife of Nostradamus' tomb has mirrored the prophet of Provençal descent's own, which was rather peculiar, as a writer. He was interred standing erect in the church of the Cordeliers of Salon in Salon de Provence at the time of his death in 1566. He was interred there for more than 300 years, until the town council decided in 1700 to relocate his remains to a more prominent crypt in honor of his enduring notoriety. An object was discovered atop his skeleton during this operation. It was a necklace bearing the inscription, 1700. The residents expeditiously reinterred him in remembrance of this foreboding disclosure, the specifics of which might have been expounded. Once more, he was buried for 91 years prior to 1791, when a group of inebriated French revolutionary soldiers foolishly entered his tomb. Restoration of the tomb was only possible after the town mayor intervened and persuaded the soldiers that Nostradamus had not been a nobleman. However, Nostradamus found the last laugh when he recalled a prophecy in which he predicted, "Evil will come, for the man who opens the tomb." Not far from Salon, the soldiers were presumably ambushed by counter-revolutionary forces and reduced to death. It is an appropriate conclusion to the peculiar convergence of destiny and Michel de Nostredame's prophecies. Opinions concerning the reputation of Nostradamus have vastly diverged over the centuries. Almost the entire period following his death in 1566, Opinions regarding his writings were favorable. Individuals who witnessed the devastation caused by religious conflicts during the 16th and 17th centuries were profoundly moved by his description of kingdoms that were beset by catastrophe after catastrophe. His reputation was bolstered subsequent to the Great Fire of London, an event that was widely recognized as the initial significant occurrence that he evidently predicted. It came as no surprise that subsequent editions of the Prophecies were published. Since the 16th century, more than 200 editions of the book have been published in numerous languages. By this metric, it ranks among the best-selling books of the last 5 centuries. During times of crisis, when ardent followers of the French plague doctor consulted his writings for ostensibly prescient predictions of impending misfortunes, sales surged. The pinnacle of this veneration for Nostradamus occurred during the 20th century, when his writings were interpreted as having foretold the rise of Hitler, the nuclear weapons, and the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Concurrently, quacks surfaced, with authors of books on Nostradamus asserting that hypnosis enabled them to communicate with the Frenchman from beyond the grave. Between the 1960s and 1980s, there was a surge in interest in dark magic and occultism, which was reflected in numerous books written about him in the 20th century. Furthermore, certain aspects of Nostradamus' life narrative underwent fabrication or significant embellishment. In recent years, there has been a growing emphasis on realism, with numerous studies published since the 1990s attempting to disprove the notion that Nostradamus was an authentic prophet by demonstrating the imprecise and general character of his prognostications. Nostradamus is currently a prominent figure in popular culture. Although only a minority of individuals have perused a copy of his prophecies, an equally small number of individuals are uninformed regarding the identity of the French prophet of the 16th century. His name evokes the notion of an Seer who, although long extinct, foretold recurrent calamities that would engulf humanity for centuries to come. Decades of best-selling books, hundreds of television programs, and documentaries have been devoted to the Provençal astrologer and their interpretations, respectively, demonstrating the extent of his influence on popular culture. Even more films have been produced in honor of Michel de Nostredame, including an Academy Award-nominated short in 1941 and an Orson Welles-narrated feature-length documentary in 1981. The latter's title, The Man Who Saw Tomorrow, provides an indication of the manner in which contemporary popular culture typically portrays Nostradamus. In recent times, the French physician renowned for curing plague has also appeared as a character in the Assassin's Creed video game series, wherein a player is tasked with deciphering a series of mysteries in Paris that are purportedly the work of Nostradamus. Consequently, the ways in which Nostradamus has been incorporated into contemporary popular culture are as diverse as the possible interpretations of his writings. Readers have undoubtedly been captivated by the works of Michel de Nostredame for centuries. His life story is relatively unexplored. In fact, significant portions of it are rendered virtually devoid of detail, particularly concerning his early years, as we have seen. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the information that is available regarding him is that he had no particular expertise in astrology or the dark arts, neither of which would have been advantageous in forming his writings. Instead, his primary occupation throughout his working life was that of a physician specializing in plague treatment. His work in southern France earned him a substantial reputation, but his true prowess in this domain was more attributable to his practical approach to sanitation than to any purported effectiveness of his rose pills. However, what was arguably more remarkable was that his prosperity as a plague physician in the 1530s and 40s enabled him to devote the majority of his time and energy to writing during the 1550s and 60s. Additionally, his extensive travels and interactions with academicians served to expand his literary horizons. Furthermore, thirdly, and arguably most significantly, Nostradamus' life as a plague doctor, during which he witnessed destruction and death everywhere he went, must have instilled in him a profound sense of dread and apprehension, or at the very least, a fixation on death and ruin. Without a doubt, this preoccupation is the most defining feature of the Prophecies. An uninitiated reader of the numerous quatrains authored by Nostradamus during the 1550s and 60s would not be met with a conspicuously upbeat assortment of rhymes. Instead, they would encounter a steady stream of prophetic messages predicting catastrophes such as fire, death, hell, famine, drought, and pestilence. Undoubtedly, this has captivated the interest of countless individuals ever since. Nostradamus' stock and trade in this. Had he composed hundreds of quatrains on subjects like dressmaking or boat construction, they would have been largely forgotten by now. However, the enduring survival of the prophecies can be attributed to their preoccupation with death and devastation, as well as the vague and esoteric style in which they were originally composed. Almost 5 centuries subsequent to their composition, individuals of all genders continue to scrutinize the Quran in search of indications and prognostications regarding forthcoming calamitous occurrences. Due to the manner in which Nostradamus composed his verse, it is virtually possible to identify an event that corresponds to a particular passage after an extended period of time has passed. What is your assessment of Nostradamus? In your opinion, were his writings prophetic in nature, or were they merely sufficiently ambiguous to permit subsequent generations to deduce a tremendous quantity from them? Kindly provide your feedback in the remark section. Until then, we appreciate your attention.